As diplomatic tensions between Japan and China escalate into one of the most serious East Asian crises in years, attention has turned to Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, and whether Moscow might now position itself more openly in the emerging confrontation. Recent moves suggest Russia might not simply remain a bystander, but could be recalibrating its posture in Asia in light of shifting alliances and strategic interests. In November 2025, a fierce diplomatic storm erupted between Tokyo and Beijing. The trigger was comments by Japan's newly installed Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who assumed office in October, suggesting that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could justify Japanese military involvement. In her parliamentary address, she argued such a scenario might represent a survival-threatening situation. Given Japan's post-war constraints on the use of force, the remarks marked a sharp turn. Still, Tokyo framed the possible intervention under its 2015 law allowing collective self-defense, a legal pathway for the deployment of its self-defense forces. Beijing responded swiftly and with severe indignation. China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Fu Kong, formally raised the issue at the international body, warning that any Japanese-initiated armed intervention would constitute a grave violation of international law. Chinese officials, including foreign policy heavyweights, framed Tokyo's remarks as crossing a red line, accusing Japan of reviving militaristic ambitions and deliberately stoking regional instability. The diplomatic rupture raced beyond mere rhetoric. Beijing moved to restrict Japanese cultural exports, travel, and trade, signaling that economic retaliation might be used to pressure Tokyo. From Tokyo's perspective, this deterioration in ties marked the sharpest downturn in Japan-China relations in decades, reshaping strategic thinking in the region. Amid the Japan-China row, Russia's actions suggest its own Eurasian pivot is accelerating. Since the start of its military campaign in Ukraine, Moscow has leaned heavily on Beijing for diplomatic cover, economic linkages, and strategic coordination. In November 2025, Russian authorities announced that Russian visa-free travel privileges will soon be extended to Chinese citizens. This policy, though not yet implemented, triggered a surge of travel interest from China. Hotel bookings in Russia's major cities spiked by as much as 400%. The move underscores how Moscow is increasingly wooing Chinese tourism and economic engagement, even as Beijing and Tokyo drift further apart. Moscow has portrayed these steps as pragmatic economic decisions, but analysts argue that the growing Russia-China alignment, reinforced through energy deals, military cooperation, and visa liberalization, also bolsters a broader strategic bloc that could reshape regional dynamics. At the same time, Russia remains cautious to avoid full subordination to Beijing. While the partnership is closer than ever, Moscow seemingly aims to preserve its autonomy and avoid becoming a junior partner in a Sino-centric order. Given the fraying of Japan-China diplomacy and Russia's deepening ties with Beijing, there is a growing case both for Moscow and outside observers that Russia could see a strategic opening. As tensions escalate over Taiwan and Japan's shifting defense posture, a volatile East Asia offers Russia a chance to strengthen its influence. With China preoccupied by Japan, Moscow could deepen its diplomatic and military leverage across the region without appearing overtly confrontational. Russia's recent visa-free overtures to Chinese tourists and continued coordination with Beijing reinforce a strategic alignment. As Russia's dependence on China for trade, technology, and diplomatic support grows, Moscow has vested interest in bolstering China's position against Western-aligned powers, including Japan. If China and Russia coordinate more overtly, economically, diplomatically, perhaps even militarily, Tokyo may find itself facing a two-front challenge, a security standoff with China and a pressure campaign from Russia. That could force Japan to rethink its posture, open the door for concessions, or shift strategic alliances. Yet, it's worth stressing, while the alignment is deep, Russia has shown reluctance to fully subordinate itself under Chinese strategic direction. Moscow appears wary of becoming a dependent actor in a future Sino-dominated order. In November 2025, at a press conference in Bishkek, President Putin commented on wider geopolitical issues. Concerning the war in Ukraine, he said a U.S. delegation was expected in Moscow soon and described the U.S. proposed 28-point peace plan as a potential basis for future agreements. He added, "It would be impolite of me to talk about any final options now, since there are none." While that statement focused primarily on Europe and the Ukraine war, it underscored Moscow's continuing engagement in high-stakes diplomacy, a posture that could translate into increased involvement in Asia if conditions shift. Meanwhile, Moscow's economic conditions remain under strain as the war's effects ripple across Russia. Several regions face growing hardship as attacks near energy infrastructure increase. Under these circumstances, strengthening economic partnerships, especially with China, may be a way for Russia to mitigate wartime costs, preserve leverage, and sustain strategic flexibility. Tokyo now faces a far more complex security calculus. A dispute with China over Taiwan has quickly become a full-blown diplomatic and economic crisis. With signs that Russia may align more closely with Beijing, Japan risks a widening encirclement. Japan may be forced to deepen cooperation with other powers, including the United States of America and possibly other regional allies, to counter a consolidated China-Russia bloc. Economic and strategic costs could rise, especially if China and Russia coordinate trade and energy moves to pressure Japan. Beijing gains from a partner in Moscow that appears willing to offer diplomatic cover and economic interdependence, giving it more flexibility in its clash with Japan. The Russia-China partnership helps deflect Western pressure on Moscow and strengthens Beijing's hand in regional maneuvers, especially with sensitive flashpoints like Taiwan. Moscow is repositioning itself as a strategic actor with freedom to lean into Asia's shifting balance, not just as a European war actor. By deepening ties with China but avoiding full subordination, Russia retains leverage. It can act as a swing power capable of influencing Asia's future political geometry. A more cohesive China-Russia axis, possibly extended to include other states, could erode existing security architectures in East Asia. The crisis could accelerate regional militarization, compel realignment of alliances, and raise the risk of miscalculation or accidental conflict. Global powers outside Asia will likely be drawn in, either to deter conflict or to protect economic interests, raising the stakes well beyond the region. At this moment, the rapidly deteriorating Japan-China ties represent more than a bilateral spat over Taiwan. They are shaping up to be a geopolitical fault line, one that could redraw the strategic map of Northeast Asia. As Russia deepens its own engagement with China through economic, diplomatic, and possibly military means, the chance that Moscow might play more than a passive role has grown. Whether Russia will take concrete steps against Japan remains uncertain. But the signs, from visa liberalization to coordinated energy and trade strategies, point to a Russia more comfortable operating in Asia's shifting balance of power. In that light, President Putin's entrance into the Japan-China feud may mark a turning point, not just for regional conflict dynamics, but for the broader international order emerging in the mid-2022s.